Hey guys, Tom here. Before we dive into this episode, I just want to tell you about a few awesome free resources we have available for anyone watching this video. Firstly, if you head over to my website, thomasbrettmixing.com, you can download a free 70-page ebook I've put together called Mixing Simplified. Within this book, you'll find tons of tips, tricks, and advice on how you can go about achieving great sounding mixes in the simplest, most easy to understand way possible. You should get a pop-up asking if you'd like to download the PDF when you first arrive on the website. But if you don't, you can also find links at the bottom of every page or on the store section of the website. Aside from the free ebook, if you head over to the blogs section of the website, you'll also find a huge collection of educational articles that I've written over the years for top audio education platforms like the Pro Audio Files, Unstoppable Recording Machine, and Joey Sturgis Tones. One final thing before we get on with the video. In the very near future, me and Max are planning to do some video segments where we review your music. If you'd like us to potentially take a listen to one of your tracks and give you some fairly in-depth feedback and advice on what you can do to improve the mix, recording, songwriting, structure, or pretty much whatever we hear in the track, feel free to submit a link to your song using the Contact Us page of the website, along with your contact details. Every now and then, we'll pick out a few random submissions to include in our upcoming videos. Anyway, let's get back to the podcast. Hey Max, how you doing?
Hey Tom, a little tired today. I think it's the weather.
Yep, same with me. A lot of
some magnetic storms.
Maybe. For me, it's lots and lots of songs, like tons and tons of songs, because I've got some big orders. I think I've mentioned them before. Just working my way through them. It's good because I'm free to do what I want. I have the freedom to write whatever I want on these particular projects. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, the instrumentals that I've been given for this, it's like 15 songs. They're good instrumentals. And the problem when you get good instrumentals is the song has to be really good to live up to it. Anything that's bad, any particular melody, any particular lyric that's cringy, it sticks out like a sore thumb. So it's the opposite problem to when I have, like, if someone sends me a middle of the road kind of fairly bland instrumental, those songs are really easy to write because the quality of the instrumental is like whatever you do sounds good on it. But when you have a really good instrumental, everything has to be amazing. So it's harder to write, but at the same time it results in a good song.
It's your perfectionism, actually.
Yeah,
which you cannot let it. You cannot let it be worse than let's say the source material you received.
Yeah. Which is the topic we're going to be talking about today, perfectionism. So for people who are just tuning into the podcast, maybe for the first time or you're new to the channel, this is our chat show or podcast where myself, Thomas Brett, and my good friend Max Morton talk about anything audio, mixing, recording, production, songwriting, or even philosophy to do with the whole concept. So today we're going to be talking about perfection, which is a topic that I think is, I'm not going to say dear to our hearts because it's a topic that can cause a lot of problems. But I'll say straight off the bat that I used to have a lot of problems with perfectionism, and I know that you've had lots of problems with perfectionism. So, where do you want to start?
Well, that's actually a great point you made. So sometimes you are intimidated by the things you're receiving. It might be just a very important client. And the expectations you set for yourself, they may be even not present somewhere there on the side of the client. It's just your mind is playing tricks with you. It also might be things you're not really prepared for. For instance, the genre you haven't really worked with yet. And perfectionism is good for learning. So at a certain point, in any case, perfectionism is better than being a narcissist and just enjoying what you're doing, even though you're not really doing anything valuable, right? So it's better to be unhappy with and it comes from a person who was working on his second album for 10 years.
Yeah.
And have I lost more than I found? In many aspects, yes. So because I was taking my time,
yep.
In the most extreme way, I was taking too much time to release that album. I was re-recording parts for dozens of times. I was rearranging songs. I was remixing them. So I finished recordings in 2017 and I only finished mixing in 2022.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't like I was just recording or just mixing all the time. No, I was just getting better and better with all the clients I was working on. And I wanted to use the best of my knowledge in my love child, like in my album.
Yep.
And it played a bad trick on me because everyone just, lost interest in my band. All the musicians I played with, right, labels and the audience. And in the end, the time was wrong because the war started and everyone was thinking about war instead of music. But at the same time, I also gained a lot because I ended up having the best possible quality
Mm-hmm.
of mixing, of recording, and I also set a very high level for myself. So I don't regret in the end. Although I know that I lost a lot, I don't regret. So it depends on the values you have and what's more important for you.
Well,
If you just want fame and quick financial gain, then I think I would call it enough quality should be your strategy.
mm-hmm.
Just get things as good as needed and spend no more time and no more effort. That classic rule of 80 to 20, 80% result, 20% of time. Then another 80% of time, you gain another 20% of quality, roughly speaking.
Yeah.
Right? But if you just love the thing you do and if you find meaning of life in getting something to the point of perfection, if you want to really exhaust something to the point of being so good there is no way to go further, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, then of course go for it, go for the quality. You will be less popular, you will be less financially successful, but a certain amount of people who really know what's going on in art, in engineering, in music, they will notice, they will say, hey, that's an exceptional work, and we hear that you spent all those years improving it, and it makes a lot of sense for us. So maybe that's even more valuable than, let's say, a bigger fan base, but people who just want to visit the show, they don't know you, they don't really know your intentions, and you will, in any way, you will be disconnected with this large fan base compared to the people you can speak the same language, like other engineers, other musicians, and so on and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Really depends on what you want in the end.
Well, it's as you say, like with perfectionism, there are people who can handle being perfectionistic, and people who can't handle being perfectionistic. In my mind, that's the way I see it. For example, there's nothing wrong with going for trying to be perfectionistic if it leads to good results and if you're healthy and happy. The problem with me personally, or maybe with you as well, I'm not sure. I don't want to speak in your place, but although I spent years and years trying to reach perfection in the things I do, which I've never achieved. Regardless of how far I go in this career, I doubt I'll ever achieve true perfection and an objective perfection, because there are always going to be people who disagree with you and have different tastes. But for me personally, whenever I was aiming for perfection and spending huge amounts of time on doing anything, it always affected my mental health and my happiness extremely negatively, to the point that I've had times when I wanted to quit or I wanted to give up, or like, I don't want to do this career, and it's only through trying to beat that perfectionism and learning to work faster, more efficiently, having deadlines, these kind of things that we've talked about, that I've got the happiness back from music, and it was to the point that now, how it is, like I don't do much mixing, I don't do much mastering, because that's the kind of stuff where I tend to get very perfectionistic. I do more songwriting. So with songwriting, you can write a song, play it to someone. It's either a good song or a bad song most of the time. It's as simple as that. It's not really a matter of perfectionism in the way that something like EQ can lead to. EQ is something that's very perfectionistic, realistically. If you have a sound, there is technically a perfect way to EQ that sound to reduce mud as much as possible, to increase clarity as much as possible, reduce harshness as much as possible, all of these things, you know? When you're talking about something like EQ or mixing, all of that stuff comes into question. But for me, something like songwriting is just way less perfectionistic. It's just more it's more natural, it's more fluid, it's more based on taste and just how you're feeling in the moment. So that was my way of kind of moving out of a perfectionistic mindset, kind of focusing more on songwriting and creativity and production rather than the stuff that is technical, you know? Although I still love that stuff. I still love mixing. I'll still happily mix. It's just I've changed the way I look at it.
Well, I think also you just found your thing.
Yeah.
So one of the paths that a perfectionist in music is following through their lifetime is finding yourself. Would you be more of a mixer or more of a songwriter or more of a performer or more of a stage person, like a front person, a celebrity? And you just find what suits you best.
Yeah.
Sorry for the phrasing here. But what I mean is that there are people who hate writing music. They will just feel as uncomfortable choosing the harmonies, maybe choosing the melodies, because it's just not their thing. But at the same time, EQing stuff, like for me, I love writing songs for myself, but it would be a nightmare for me to make a job out of it. Because for me, every song is like a thing I treat as my property, probably.
It's personal to you.
And yeah, and I would probably hate just butchering that song, changing things in it and everything. And you know, I think I could adopt to that. I could change myself a little bit. I could deform. I could shape myself to become a songwriter who would just do it for money. But I want to keep it as is. I don't want to change. I just want to leave some magic there for myself. At the same time, when mixing, I can think of it algorithmically, like quickly knowing what a track needs in terms of EQ and other processing that might carry you away and you know, bring you some emotional trauma. I can get away without it, and I actually can remain creative, and I can still enjoy mixing in the process in the meantime. So you just found yourself, which is great, and I found myself, but we went through some suffering and we tried different things. Like I had lots of projects where I was recording guitars, basses, arranging things, keyboards, backing tracks, intros, outros, all that stuff. And I can do it if the project needs it, but I prefer to avoid it because that's my choice. But I tried it. The same with you. You were a mixer and a mastering engineer, and you did everything. You were sitting there with artists. You were tracking singers, working with singers, comping them into better performances. Yeah, all this stuff. But then you realize that your thing is something different. Well, and you found happiness.
It's strange. It's a very weird dilemma because I still love mixing. I still love mixing. I think I'm a good mixer. I love recording. I love the whole process. It's just my mindset always goes into that weird place when I'm working on a project for someone else. The thing is, I'm back in the day, probably 8-10 years ago, when I was having these perfectionism related issues with how I was feeling about myself and my work and all that kind of stuff. Back then, I hadn't written many songs either, you know? I hadn't written a ton of songs, and when I did write songs, basically my perfectionism kind of infiltrated everything I did. So if I was going to write a song, it would take me weeks to write a song, you know? It wasn't until I started doing songwriting as a career, you know, when we started getting songwriting work, that I was forced into doing things quickly because you had deadlines and strict deadlines, and at the end of the day you have to earn money and you have to make a living. So if you're spending too long on a project, you're screwing up every one of those things that I've said. So it wasn't until I started doing songwriting very frequently, like I have to write a song in 3 days, and then that 3 days turns into 2 days, and then that 2 days turns into 1 day, and eventually that 1 day turns into, okay, I have 2 hours to write a song, you know? And you may think, oh, 2 hours, surely the quality is going to go down. But no, as I started doing more and more songs, and the times had to get quicker and quicker, I got better at doing it. And the perfectionism started going away. But also another big aspect of this whole thing is I started getting frequent feedback from people. So where before it would take like 3 weeks to write a song or whatever, 2 weeks to write a song, and then because of the perfectionism, you maybe don't even release that song that you've spent two weeks writing because you're scared of releasing it because what are people going to think? How can you possibly know if that song is good or not if you're not getting feedback from people, if you're not getting people's opinions? You're just living inside your own head the whole time. This idea of perfection that is your personal opinion, and you've never actually had any outside input into this whole scenario. So when I started doing stuff more frequently, getting feedback from people, and people saying, hey, this is really good, I really like this. There you go, here's your money, here's your review, we're done. And then they come back for another song, and suddenly this work was stockpiling to the point that we were getting tons and tons and tons of songwriting work. My self-confidence went from here to up there, and my perfectionistic tendencies went from here to down here. Not meaning the quality is going down, but it means that I'm doing what you talk about a lot, which is the good enough, you know, the where something is good enough. And I wouldn't even say good enough, because that good enough sounds like you're not putting in much effort. It's more the fact that you have a better understanding of what is necessary and what makes something good. And you're focusing in on that stuff and not the small, minute
that
details.
Good enough comes from a person who has already lived with perfectionism for many years. So when you say good enough, it means good enough coming from you, not good enough coming from a person who cannot really make a great thing.
Yeah. So it's not good enough in the sense that, oh, I'm just going to do the bare minimum and they'll be happy with it. No, it's not that. It's the thing of I know. I'd say objectively, though that might sound like I've got a bit of ego.
You don't have to put a new record. You just do your regular high quality thing.
Something that's objectively good, you know? And the reason I know it's objectively good is because I have the track record to back that up. If I've done 600 songs and I've had good reviews for all of them, I know at this point that I can write good songs, and I know when I've created a good song, you know? It's like with these songs I mentioned, when I'm doing these 15 songs for this one client and the instrumentals are good, I know when I've reached that point where the song is good enough, you know? Things will stick out to me. I know it all.
Yeah, there is also always an illusion of uniqueness.
Mm-hmm.
We are unique, of course we are, but we can be classified in everything we do. And when you classify things, that helps your mind work, optimizes your mind, optimizes the way you treat things. And if you think like, okay, there are a few bass tones, let's first categorize them into like deep, let's say, I won't think too much about it right now, but let's say deep, detailed, like singing bass tone, and let's say crunchy, distorted, aggressive bass tone.
Mm-hmm.
And you could probably even categorize synth bass tones into the same categories. So let's say you do. There are more tones than that, but let's say you do. Then when your mind already can operate quicker because you think, okay, this is the distorted bass category. Then you listen to that bass, and again, within that category, you can categorize it again and again and again. And same thing with guitar tones, and same thing with melodies. So when there is a certain mood of the song, there are certain moves as a composer or as arranger or as a hired player, as a session studio player, certain things you would do and you would not do. And that way, you can work way more efficiently. And what you said about the amount of time you find appropriate for a given job. So first you thought, okay, one song cannot take less than 2 weeks or it's just a bad job. Then you realize that you just need 2 hours to write a good song.
Yeah.
It means that initially we live in chaos. So our thoughts are in chaos. We are like we're like floating in the ocean of options and possibilities, and we don't know the direction. But in the end, you're like a professional swimmer. You know where the destination point is, and you just build a straight line between your current location and the destination point, and just swim it directly there, and it takes 2 hours. Same with mixes, same with everything else. That's why when you watch a professional session musician, and you cannot even imagine, but they can just come to the studio, listen to the song a couple of times, make a few notes, and then just play a few takes, and it's done. It's a great bass line, for instance, right?
Yeah.
That's how they do the thing.
The thing, on the exact topic you're talking about, for example, in the context of mixing and perfectionism, when you start producing a song, for example, you're producing a song, you're starting a new song from scratch, there is such thing as the perfect guitar tone or the perfect bass tone, the perfect drum samples for that particular song. And you could spend months and months and months trying out hundreds of guitars, hundreds of pickups, hundreds of picks, hundreds of amps, hundreds of cabs, hundreds
That's
of
the ocean
particular
I'm talking
speakers
about,
on the cab.
right?
Yeah, hundreds of mics, hundreds of mic combinations, and then the balance between those mic combinations. You could spend literally thousands of hours, infinite hours, searching for the perfect tone for every single element in a mix. And at the end of it, you'd spend 5 months working on a single song, like some of the examples you've given in the past to do with clients.
Yeah. But also think of it, our perception is fluid. So when testing gear, like, oh, I want to be a good engineer, I will try every microphone on the singer. By the end of the test, there is no mood left, no mojo left. The singer is just, I want to quit. You won't get great vocal takes.
It's all of that stuff.
I have a perfect chain for you. You're a rock singer. Here's the compressed SM7B straight into 1176. Let's go.
Yeah.
And the singer's super motivated, and they will just do the best performance ever.
Yeah.
And again, same thing as you said. I remember when we were searching for the tones for Wallflower's Jinjer album, and they wanted a really dirty bass tone without too much note definition. Not note definition, but more like attack definition. You know, that regular Dingwall into dark glass bass. We just wanted something completely different. And we were not searching for long. It probably took us 1 hour to build a tone.
Yeah.
Because we were instantly, of course it comes from all that experience we had before, but also that's because we were ready to enjoy what we heard. And if it was good, we were just lock on and probably add something different, but not just try each and every option and then choose one that fits most and try it in the context of another like 10 drum mixes that will just exhaust you. And
you can
again,
go
your
forever,
perception is fluid like that water. So the more you chaotically move, the more you're getting tired, and in the end you drown. That's it.
Yeah.
So perfectionism is very good for learning. And perfectionism, I would recommend everyone to try it out. But
that's the funny thing, yeah.
But be careful.
That is exactly the perfect way to put it. The thing is, if we, I'm going to speak for both of us, if we hadn't been so perfectionistic when in our formative years of mixing and mastering and recording and production and all that stuff, we wouldn't know all the stuff that we know now, you know?
Yeah.
The thing is now when I approach something like finding a guitar tone or a bass tone, I have certain go-tos in my head. I'm sure you do as well. You know, 5150 for metal. You don't have to do that thing, that exact. You can go for a meso or whatever. But I'm just to give the general point, 5150 for metal, something like a JCM 800 or a Marshall Plexi or something for pop punk, for example. Or maybe you want to, I don't know, if you're doing blues or jazz, you might want to, like a Fender or something. I don't know. The reason we know this stuff, and the reason nowadays, if I was going to get a tone in a song, I'd choose 3 of the amps I think will work, and then go through them. Okay, I think this one works the best. Just go with that. Just go with that and make it work with the settings, maybe a couple of pedals, a couple of effects, whatever, rather than trying out 500 different amps, The reason for that is because of the time we spent being perfectionistic. And as I said before, it's not necessarily that perfectionism is a bad thing. It can be perfectly fine if you have the right mindset and you're not letting it ruin your life, essentially. The problem with me is I let it ruin my life, big time, many times, with a lot of projects, to the point that either I got very unhappy or I was delaying projects and taking too long, to the point that a client got unhappy. And it's
same with me.
None of that stuff is worth the perfectionism. So if you can't deal with the perfectionism, maybe you should just try and take a step back and simplify things. But if you can afford to take time and learn things at the start of your career, yeah, go ahead and do that. I mean, that's how you learn all the best things, all the best tones, the best sounds, where they come from.
Yeah, there are 2 things that come with perfectionism, especially early on, when you cannot really do anything about certain things. For instance, you have a band, then that band is really weak and you have to do a lot of editing and re-recording. You just cannot get away without
that stuff.
Without it.
You can't apply perfectionism in that kind of scenario. It just doesn't. You can't. You need to make compromises.
Yeah, but no. I mean, for instance, that you want a tight, let's say, speed metal or power metal or death metal recording, and the band are just not tight. But you need to deliver quality result because you want your reputation to go up and you want everyone to hear that record and say, wow. And people don't really sometimes understand the difference between performances and mix quality. So they will not really understand that those guitar DIs are so bad that no reamping will make them sound good, right? So you start editing guitars, but you also record certain parts and you blend them in. So let's say the mute notes are really bad, so you re-record the mutes, but you leave the open chords or some melody progressions there. You do a lot of stuff, and you start surgical, methodical work on every little part of the song. Or let's say the drummer is really, really, really untight, and you have to do something with it, and you cannot just reprogram him. A million of things like that. And then what happens then? Okay, you fix everything. You get a great result. The band loves you. You're very tired. You're burnt out, but you've achieved your goal. At that point, in your mind, you have a new reflex formed. From now on, editing, like creating the album, equals all this suffering. So even with much better bands, many years later, when you're not doing all that stuff, you will still get that little feeling inside of insecurity and of, that's going to be a lot of unpleasant job. Why haven't they just played it right? You will always get that. And that comes in parallel with perfectionism. But at the same time, I'm not sure if I would be where I am now, if I would be even recognized by anyone, if I would not do lots of such projects early on my career as a mixer, as a producer. So at the same time, you gotta do what you need. You gotta be perfectionist where you need to be to become better, but you gotta always control that feeling, and you gotta always reevaluate your past deformations. So you received professional deformation with each project that was more or less traumatic for you. With every level up, you got to reevaluate those old experiences. Then perfectionism won't traumatize you. you will just understand, okay, now I'm much stronger and I'm working with much better bands. I'm not getting all those bad experiences I used to get early on. So now when I need to edit something or when I need to produce another speed metal band, it won't be that experience. It will be a totally different experience. That's what I'm saying. So there are ways to cope with those problems that come together with perfectionism.
Yeah.
And of course, at the same time, I'm sorry for maybe taking too much time for my
okay.
monologue again.
No, go ahead.
But I remember the very first time when I came out victorious after my perfectionist marathon, so to say. I was working on our song, on the Morton song, Through the Never. And I recorded everything. I decided I don't want to make a lot of takes. Instead, I was practicing a lot. So I practiced every part, every guitar riff, the solo, and the bass line to complete perfection. The only thing I couldn't get was the very first vocal phrase. So everything was recorded, everything was perfect. And the first phrase, I just couldn't get it. I tried everything. I even tried to get drunk. I tried to lay down on the floor, to turn off the light, anything to get the proper take. I just could not. I probably made 1,000 takes of that first through the end of Days Will Stand United, and I just could not get it right. Eventually, I made it. But everything else, not this phrase, I think it was some test from the universe, from the forces above, but everything else in the song, I still enjoy every little bit of the song. How the bass was played, I deliberately used slightly dead bass strings to make it sound a little fatter, a little less bright, as a proper Fender P bass, instead of like modern distorted bass. Everything just worked right because of how I practiced the song and how perfectionist I was. And at that time I realized that, hey, it makes sense. I'm happy that I spent all this effort on the song. I could probably just record it from the first few takes. It would sound a little less tight, a little less perfect, a little less, nuanced. But I'm really happy I did all that. So sometimes it's very important to listen to yourself. Maybe it's a proper project for you to spend maybe 10 times more effort, but just get that a couple % additional quality.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's that.
I think the big factor there, though, is you were doing it for yourself. Is that correct? You were doing that for yourself rather than doing that for anyone else, because you know that other people aren't going to notice that difference, when it comes to, well, first of all, when someone listens to your song, when someone listens to a song that you've made, there's a 50-50 chance that they're going to either even listen to the whole song or just turn it off anyway, based on their tastes and stuff like that.
Of course. Yeah.
That's the first battle you need to win, So if you've spent like 500 hours on a tiny detail in something, chances are, and you know this as well, people aren't going to notice that. So if you're doing that for yourself, and you have a certain goal in mind and you're trying to reach that goal, perfectly fine. It's just you need to know that that's what you're doing and realize that that's what you're doing.
Absolutely. Well, that's how the finest of art was done, I think. Yeah. So many artists were like that, and that's what creates real value in certain pieces of art.
Well, the thing I was going to say is I think the difference when it comes to things like mixing between me and you is confidence, maybe. So there's perfectionism. We both have had a perfectionism related problem. But the difference, I think, when it comes to mixing is you're very confident in your mixing. As I know sometimes you have bad weeks and all that, and sometimes you can feel like you're not. But from me knowing you for the last, I don't know, how close to 10 years, it's probably 8 or 9 years, I know that you have a certain degree of confidence in the things you do. Whereas when it comes to mixing, I don't have that same confidence that you have. So when I'm trying to reach perfection, it's not because I have a goal in mind and I'm trying to reach that goal. It's more that I don't want people to judge me from the outside. You know, I don't want people to say, oh, look at that thing he's done wrong or whatever. It's that fear, you know? But I don't have that same problem when it comes to songwriting. When it comes to songwriting, I have absolute 100% faith in my own ability. You know, I don't care what people think, as long as I think it's a good song. So it's this weird discrepancy between, they're both music related jobs, but with one of them I have this problem, and with the other I don't. So in the case of something,
it's very
like,
important.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, it's very important to keep in mind that there is always a disconnection between how you perceive a song, be it a mix or a song itself, or like a full product, a song plus a mix plus vocals plus lyrics plus artwork, just a product, and the audience. Everyone in the audience will have different opinions. I just had a little release, and I won't tell who it is, but quite a popular release, and there are loads of comments, and people are literally saying opposite things. If you read all the comments, you realize, because it's interesting to know what people think. Some people think vocals are great. At the same time, a few people think that the song is too pop. They want more metal. But at the same time, other people say, and obviously the vocals are the best thing in the song, and you need more vocals. Everything is just too guitar oriented. So it really depends on who's listening.
Yeah.
So that's why I honestly, I only care about my understanding of what's good for the song when it's something like my own song, or I care about what I and the band think about the song when I'm mixing someone or when I'm producing someone. That's what matters. And because different clients have different tastes, it's so important for everyone who's working with the client, and that's perfectionism in itself. Like you gotta learn a lot to do that, understand and almost become the client. So when you're working with metalheads who probably only listen to metal and they just don't have anything else in mind, you would be a different person when mixing and when talking with them, and compared to some different client who is very, very musically diverse, and they've listened to lots of older stuff and non-metal stuff and electronic music, and you will go on a journey with them trying to find the tone they want. So each time it's totally different experience. And it's even an interesting thing, if you ask me. I like that it's almost like acting, I think. You're turning into different people when you're working with different clients.
Yeah.
And not always being a perfectionist is a good thing, actually, when you think about it that way. Because, again, there might be a disconnection between you and the client. Sometimes what you feel is like super dirty and requires editing or even re-recording is perfect for the client.
Yeah.
And sometimes they are even right.
Yeah.
Because I just had recently, I had a band that's like a very straightforward death metal, and they had a little guitar part on top. So after editing and gating, that guitar part stopped sounding cool, just sounded too edited, and no amount of reamping could help it. I tried drenching it in delay, it didn't help. But then, when we returned to the unedited DI, it was out of time, it was even out of tune, it was noisy, but it sounded right.
Yeah.
So it was my mistake, even though I had all this experience and everything. So sometimes perfectionism doesn't work.
Well, the thing that I think of that's been going through my head while you're saying these things is just that the real key is just nothing is as important as we think it is. Nothing is as crucial as we think it is with any of this stuff, with any particular part of the whole process. And if you go back to when we talk about like our favorite bands and like the greatest bands of all time, the greatest pop artists of all time, a lot of that stuff was just the band just doing their thing. being true to themselves, doing it the way they wanted to do it. For example, we talk about like the first Black Sabbath album, for example, you know, like was any of the things that we've talked about in this podcast or any of our other podcasts, pretty much none of it applies at all when you're thinking of like an album like that had the impact that it had. You know, it was just like four guys going into a studio and just recording their blues songs that they'd been playing in pubs and bars.
Hours, yeah.
You know, and just getting it done almost live, you know, and it goes on to be like one of the greatest heavy metal albums of all time. And then everyone, for the last 50 years, everyone's chasing the Tony Iommi guitar tones. Did Tony Iommi...
Yeah, literally.
Work?
And he was using sevens probably, like super thin strings.
Probably.
Down-tuned.
I bet they did tons of stuff. I bet they did tons of stuff wrong on that album, you know, or...
Exactly. It was wrong all over, like using banjo strings because there were no thin guitar strings. And, you know, I just saw a meme today, like that domino thing with increasing, every domino was bigger and bigger, and then the guy was pushing the first domino, and the first domino was some guy in Birmingham having his fingers chopped off.
Yeah, exactly.
Like 50 years of evolution of metal.
Yeah, and now you have all these mega heavy bands these days.
Riffs and everything. Yes, definitely.
But you see what I'm saying? The thing is, everything has become so important to us, and everything's so crucial and perfection and these kind of concepts, when in reality...
At the same time, people want that. You see, some bands, they just need that to sound right. That's just what some of the genres need. If you have orchestral metal, or if you have synth metal, so you have like arpeggiators and drum loops and lots of layers, you got to do that tight edits, and you got to use Evertune, or just tune your guitars really well to make things translate. And you just, again, I don't think that it's necessarily a good thing, because there were early synth metal bands or industrial metal bands that sounded really cool, even though they sounded dirtier, but it gave them that edge that some of the bands don't have now. But that's just how things evaluate, and we are not in the position to always be revolutionary about it and always protest it. Sometimes we just got to play the rules that we have. But yeah, it looks like, you know, back in the day when rock music was young, it was like finding a new golden mine, like rich golden mine, and everything is yours. At the same time now, it's like we have only the exhausted mines, and we are learning the ways to process that poor ore that contains almost nothing, to just gain the last remaining grains of gold that are left there. And those tools are like editing and, you know, very, very good quality crisp production and things like that.
But it's like we can overanalyze past things. Like people will analyze the Brown sound from Eddie Van Halen, stuff like this. Oh, Eddie did this, he did this. And Eddie Van Halen, of course, he did have a good understanding of his gear and what he was doing. Of course he did. But at the end of the day, how did that sound, that iconic sound that everyone wants to recreate, how did that come about? It was literally Eddie Van Halen dialing in the tone that he wanted, that he enjoyed. And it turned out that everyone else enjoyed it too. And that's the same case with any of our favorite bands.
I bet if you had the DI of Eddie playing Eruption or something, you could probably recreate that without anyone noticing using neural DSP.
Yes, exactly. Because it's just playing, you know?
Yeah. Sometimes we're chasing a totally different thing. It's not the Brown tone that will make things better. Of course, if it's fun for you, same as I was just, you know, mixing something for 10 years. If I want to do that, I can do that, of course, forever. But it's not the real value of that music. It's just me being a little crazy.
Yeah.
Same thing with guitar enthusiasts. Some people just want to get that tone because that tone will inspire them to play some music. But we should not think that the real value of, let's say, Eddie Van Halen's music legacy is his tone.
Yeah.
His tone changed everything, that's for sure, but he and his tone were one big thing. You cannot really separate one from another.
Yeah.
So perfectionism is also a way to screw things up in terms of understanding. You can just get out of this thing really confused. And you can also confuse the band, especially if you force them do certain things that are really unnatural for a band to do. So they might think that recording is some sort of a hyper meticulous process with million takes, and you got to go into the studio and work out as if you're preparing for some sort of competition, which is not always the thing. So there are good and bad sides of being way too perfectionist, for the lack of the better word.
No, it's as we say. There's a good kind of perfectionism if you're in control of the perfectionism. If you're truly in control of the perfectionism to the point that you know what you're doing, it's not affecting you negatively. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. It's the thing I've said of if you have this perfectionism and you know that it's ruining your life, but you're continuing with it regardless, the way I felt for years, even though I had some successful mixes, even though I had, a lot of kind of successes that a lot of people would dream of having, I knew that it was affecting me so badly that I made a change. So I was aware of the problem, and when I made the change towards songwriting, everything became easier in my life. Everything became happier, especially this last year or so when I've just said, okay, I'm just going to get Max to mix all of my stuff. I can't explain how much freedom that gives me in terms of creativity and happiness when I'm able to just pass my insecurities off to someone else who is more confident in what they do. It's amazing.
Honestly speaking, I don't know, because it still feels strange to me. It's like I cannot believe that you delegate the mixing to me, because mixing your stuff is usually super easy because of how you prep the tracks. You are the mixer yourself, so your tracks are really halfway there, if not more than halfway. It's like,
but that thing you're saying
why
right
are you
now,
not mixing it? It's mystery.
I know, but that's the proof. That's
the
the proof. That's the proof that I'm a perfectionist when it comes to this stuff. So you say my tracks are really good, but for me, they're not good, and I'd rather give it to you. That's just proof that I have a perfectionism problem in that area,
Well, my perfectionism has ended, and that's actually what's helped me a lot. I don't think it's the best way to end your perfectionism, but at a certain point, I was so tired and I was so desperate, I just stopped caring. And
that's another way to do it, yeah.
And I started mixing without caring that much, and I realized that when I stopped caring, it started sounding better.
No, yes, exactly. The problem that's the problem. It's very hard for me to stop caring.
Recovery. Yeah.
I did a sorry, go ahead.
No. I mean, the same thing with editing. I remember bands were listening to me, and they were recording like a dozen takes of vocals. And because they didn't really know what to listen to, they just recorded equally average, mediocre takes.
Yeah, just hope for the best.
And I was analyzing every phrase and combining and like spending probably a full day, one song just to comp one proper vocal take and edit the timing of it. Then I would tune it the next day. I spent a lot of time on one vocal take. I never do it anymore. First of all, I give the bands very strict instructions, should be no more than 3 takes. If you have many takes, it means you have to delete all the unnecessary takes.
Yeah, just choose the 3 best takes.
So only leave the very best takes, what you like the most. Then among these 3 takes, I would listen to, and probably I would listen to the first take. And as soon as I hear something that irritates me, I would stop, I would mute that part, and then I would listen to other takes. Then I would just quickly, when I'm done with the first take, I would quickly listen to the second take, and I would analyze if there is something there that I like more, that I really enjoy. And if I find something that I think, oh wow, that was a great part, like a great high note or a great transition, I would compare it to the first take. And if it's better, then I would replace it. If it's not better, and in most cases it's not better actually. So And then I would probably use another track for a double track, and I would just align it.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean that I'm sloppy in what I'm doing. I'm still very precise when I'm editing. I'm removing all the unnecessary sounds, clicks, pops, inhales. I'm controlling the timing and make sure that everything is super tight and punchy, and then I'm tuning it by hand, and I make sure that I include the intonation deviations, like the bass is a little sharp, guitar is a little sharp, so vocals should also be a little sharp.
Yeah.
By ear. So I'm not sacrificing quality, but I know that if I start doing all this unnecessary job by digging into 20 takes and trying to create something artificial, in the end it will sound worse. It's a perfection. We just, maybe it comes from the public school actually, but that unnecessary toil that we've been learned to go through to receive a good mark. Like, oh, okay, you work hard on this useless piece of information that you will never use in your life ever, delivered to you in the worst possible way. Let's say it's physics. And you could see a practical experiment that would be amazing and it would inspire you.
Yeah.
But instead, an uninspired teacher will give you an uninspired piece of information you will never use in your life.
Yeah.
But you gotta learn it to get the perfect or the good mark.
Yeah.
In our case, it was like 1 to 5. I know that in other countries it's like A to E. So in our case, 5 is A, 1 is E, or something like that. So to get all the A's, you got to do all that unnecessary stuff. And then with the same crooked mindset, you get into the studio and you start doing unnecessary stuff because you think that it's the right way. The thing, it's the wrong way, actually. And that beautiful, inspiring experiment that would probably make you love physics and make you enjoy certain things in this science, in this amazing science, actually. Interesting, amazing science. Same thing as chemistry and all other stuff, and mathematics. That is probably what I describe as, you just get one take and you quickly go through it, boom, done. You want a snare, you grab the SSL channel, you crank the knobs, bring up the compression, bring up the parallel compression, put a clipper on it, boom, you have a great snare. You move forward. That's that magic of engineering. That's like if I had the dream teacher of sound engineering, he would probably show me all these beautiful experiments with SSL plugins and the tricks that work, that do the trick, that do the magic, that create the maximum result.
Yeah.
And that's, I guess, what happened with all these free tutorials on YouTube at a certain point. Because I remember the times when we had none of that, and then all of a sudden we had some of the first CLA videos, and all of a sudden the quality went up for so many of us because we realized that there are certain go-to tricks that always work.
Yeah, which is the core of everything we're talking about. Actually. Yeah. Well, that's the exact that cure that you're talking about is the exact thing which you kind of want to try and find that cure and apply it to every aspect of everything you do. We always talk about crystal algae mixes and how they make us feel something. And I was listening to some crystal algae mixes this morning in the car when I was going shopping, and I heard some resonances in the crash cymbal.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, you can't have resonances in the crash cymbal.
Okay, resonance in the crash cymbal or resonance in the sibilance. Is it? I think perfectionism, one of the ways to classify perfectionism is doing things that you should not do instead of doing things you should do.
Yeah.
And you spend so much effort on removing the resonances that should not be removed that in the end, you screw up the balances. You screw up artistic compression that should sound beautiful. So instead of concentrating on mighty and powerful compression, meaty and punchy low end, beautiful, wide spatial effects, things like that, you think, okay, I have 100 bands on my EQ available. Let me use all of them. Back in the day, I was using, before Pro Q came out, I was using Voxengo Gliss EQ, quite a powerful EQ, and it had a horrible option. You could upscale every part of the spectrum, and you could use super narrow cues.
Yeah,
and
literally
it was upscaling
one
guitar
hertz,
fees.
yeah.
And I was just doing all the stuff and completely ruining. And I realized that I was doing a wrong thing, but I just could not stop.
Yeah.
Because some part of me was hoping that I would probably find a way to do it right. No. And the cymbal resonances is the thing I find in all of those mixes. Jens Bogren, one of my favorite mixers.
Yeah.
And I always hear that the cymbals are resonant, but then I realize, hey, that's how they sound.
Exactly.
They don't sound like white noise.
Yeah. No, if you stand, what does a drum kit sound like? If you're standing in front of a drum kit with a heavy rock drummer hitting the drums, it sounds like crap. It sounds harsh. It sounds loud. That's what a drum kit sounds like. It's just the fact that when you get the chance to record it and turn those cymbals down, you can actually hear those frequencies and you think that they should be removed, but a lot of the time they shouldn't. And that's not to say that you can't remove certain frequencies. Of course, like if you watch someone like Nolly, for example, he'll say like, oh, I usually try and limit myself to like 1 or 2 resonant frequencies and I notch them out. That's fine. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is this thing that we think is perfection, where you go in and you have 20 or 30 cuts on a cymbal to reduce every single... No, you're not supposed to remove all of them. That's part of the sound, you know? Yes, it may be harsh, but that harshness is part of the sound. A degree of harshness is necessary for it to sound like a cymbal, for it to sound exciting. Which is what I say with the crystal algae example. I can be listening to one of my favorite albums of all time, mixed by CLA in the car, and it's amazing. And it affects me emotionally, you know? The mix affects me emotionally, alongside the songs and the lyrics and the instrumentation and all that. But then if I go into my perfectionistic mindset and I start thinking, oh, there's a resonance on the cymbal, that's the point where the whole thing falls apart. You know, I shouldn't be doing that. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if there's a resonance on the cymbal or on the vocal or on the guitar, because it's achieved its goal. And that's the thing that a guy like CLA or Andy Wallace or Jens Bogren really, that's what they get. They're achieving the goal that they're setting out to achieve with the mix, which is to impact people, to
and
accentuate the excitement.
That is perfection, actually.
That is true perfection.
Yeah, and I'm not sure that CLA is a perfectionist. I think he's opposite.
Oh no, he's not.
Perfectionist.
He's not a perfectionist at all.
Yeah, he's that kind of person who loves to get as much result with as few effort as possible.
Yeah,
and that's a great thing for all us neurotic people out there who are really who are not shy to work hard. So I was always a hard worker, and I thought, okay, if I work hard enough, maybe I could achieve better quality, and that played bad trick on me, because I thought of working hard as of doing all those unnecessary things. In the concept of the whole career, actually, another thing I think of from time to time, maybe if I was a little bit less forgiving for the clients, towards the clients who are bad at their instruments, I would probably have a slightly different client base. And who knows, maybe it would be better for me. Because even now I can say that my only real famous band who I work with, real famous Jinjer, they are actually good at their instruments. I had nothing nightmarish about them in terms of editing, in terms of making million takes, nothing like that. So maybe I was wrong in my approach, again, being very perfectionist with fixing someone else's errors.
Yeah.
So again, being ready to work way too hard, that kind of perfectionist is always bad for you. But when you're doing it for yourself in terms of education, like okay, I want to try and get absolute best results when I'm writing, when I'm recording my own song.
Mm-hmm.
Or let's say I'm mixing for myself and time isn't an issue.
Mm-hmm.
Track delivery isn't an issue. Then I might experiment with my mind. I might experiment with plugins. I might experiment with techniques, and I would probably come out more experienced, better, more efficient, and everything like that. When it comes to clients, what you said about songwriting, I think waiting is one of the things that clients usually hate.
Mm-hmm.
Even if they say, okay, just do your thing, take your time. If you send a mix 3 weeks later or a month later or 2 months later, I had all sorts of long-lasting projects. The clients usually are less happy. Even if they're happy, they will be more critical when listening.
Mm-hmm.
If you send them the mix 2 days after you receive the tracks, usually you shock them in a good way.
Yeah.
That usually leads to fewer revisions and to the better end result.
Yeah.
At the same time, if you send them the mix too fast, they might think that you haven't worked hard enough.
Yeah.
So if you finish the mix 3 hours later, just let it rest, let it stay for a day or two.
Yeah.
Listen to it again and send it to them.
Yeah. No, that aspect, I'd actually written that down as a talking point earlier when I was thinking of things that we could talk about on this topic. Like another aspect of this whole concept, this whole topic is the impact that perfection has on your career, on your relationships, and stuff like revisions and demoitis as well. Like we've talked about this in the past slightly, but when you're a perfectionist and you're spending 3 months on a project, which I'd done. Like 3 months on a mixing project at the start of my career, done stuff like that. First off, the expectations go really, really high for the person, the client, because, you're waiting 3 months, sure, it's going to be the best thing ever. And you haven't even sent them the first mix. You don't even know if you're in the ballpark of what they're looking for, because you spent so much time. And maybe the first kind of things you were doing were in the ballpark, but then you got so perfectionistic and so went in such a different direction within those 3 months that the whole thing changed to the point that you're no longer in the ballpark of what the client wanted anyway. All that kind of stuff can happen. And then you send it to the client and they're like, oh, this isn't what we originally were talking about, And you just wasted 3 months.
And then the fear kicks in, yeah. And then you're no longer confident. It will be so hard for you to fix it.
That, plus you've got demoitis because of the fact that you've heard the thing for such a long way in a certain way.
It's hard for you to get the thing to really change things at that point.
So there's that whole career aspect of perfectionism, Plus there's the whole thing of if you're fast at working, if you work fast, and again, as you say, you don't want to work too fast, because if you just get the stems from the client and you send it off within an hour, that doesn't look too good, regardless of if you've done a really good job. Maybe just wait a day or two. But a day or two for a mix is a good turnaround. And within that day or two, both yourself and the client haven't had too much time to get too attached to particular sounds or things in the demo. And you'll still be open to changing things, And they'll probably like it more. If you send the exact same mix in 1 day versus sending it in 30 days, you'd probably get less revisions on the 1 day mix, I think.
Definitely.
Which is strange, but I think that would happen, simply because of, expectations and the psychology of the whole thing. So
always happens like that, I must say, because I recently somehow it happened that I have more incoming projects where they have reamped guitars or say guitars without the DIs, and there is not much I can do in terms of editing and not much I should do. So I usually just tidy up the vocals. I ask my assistant to do a tiny bit of, very minor editing on the instrumental part of things. Maybe just, clean up the bleed on the toms, move things around a little bit, just basic things. And then I just do the mix, and I just speed all the way through that in one direction. I literally spend just a few hours on the mix. And it's the most fun reaction I get from the clients.
Yeah.
The positivity is just over the top. And it's usually more experienced musicians, and those people are usually quite confident in. They know the priorities. So those kinds of musicians, they would never say things the beginners would say.
Mm-hmm.
Like, let's try 10 different tones. They don't want to try 10 tones. They don't.
Mm-hmm.
They have their tones settled in already.
Mm-hmm.
They want a great mix. But that's how it should work in the end. That's how it should work. For everyone listening, I don't say that any taken job should just take one day. That's just impossible. When you have a song that only has DIs, MIDI drums, lots of vocal takes, things are not edited, you haven't yet found the tones, no one tells you what tones they want, spending 2 weeks on that project on one song is totally fine. That's a normal time frame for a project like that. When you do, actually what you do there, you do production, not just editing and mixing, you do production.
Mm-hmm.
Finding guitar tones is more of a production thing. Finding drum tones is more of it's not mixing.
Mm-hmm.
Mixing is when you have something to mix.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have the ingredients yet. You find the ingredients. So again, when it comes to just mixing, it's very hard for me to imagine the perfectionist situation, because to me, mixing is the process when everything is already set, like basic things. Everything else is more or less algorithmic.
Mm-hmm.
The amount of compression, the amount of EQ, the choice of reverbs, everything, you can really categorize those things.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm sure that you will reply the same thing to me about songwriting. When you have a specific task on the song, not something like that 5-page manual of what the person imagines and you realize they don't know what they want.
Mm-hmm.
When they have a clear aim, clear technical task, you can write a song in 2 hours because you have the algorithm in mind.
Yeah.
The choice of actions is there.
Yeah. And it comes back to the simple thing on both topics, both songwriting and mixing. You talk about just mixing and having fun, right? That whole thing. And chances are a mix where you've had fun doing it is going to sound better than a mix where you haven't had fun.
Yeah.
And that also ties back in, like you explain, you're just talking about how sometimes you get a mix and you work really fast and it's fun and you send it and the client is happy. There's no difference between that process for you as a mixer and that whole thing I talked about of Black Sabbath going into the studio and bashing out an album that becomes a huge hit.
Yes.
And you talked about the same thing with Jinjer and how the most successful band you've worked with is Jinjer, and also they're the best at their instruments and they're the most... probably out of most of the bands that you work with, they're the most likely to just do what they want to do. And you've talked about this before, like they do the guitar tones, the drum tones, the things that they're aiming for in their head. They have a goal. Yeah. They're not aiming for some modern standard of this is the way we need to sound. They're just doing what they want to do, and that has resulted in...
to the point, I have to re-ask them.
Yeah,
guys, are you sure? Because that's so different. Like those drums, are you sure? They say, man, we don't care. That's how we imagine it. That's how we sound when we play it on the rehearsals. We want acoustic drums, or we want mid-range guitar because we're tired of that fizz. We want to blast it loud and we hate fizz on guitars. So, I think that I actually lost my train of thought while I was talking about Jinjer. But I think that preserving the fun in any process is one of the most important things, because the whole art thing, at least the whole popular art, is based on enjoying things. Even if you're listening to a hyper depressive genre of music and you want to cry and feel miserable while doing that, you want to enjoy that feeling of desperation, whatever. Right? And actually doing everything that is very perfectly set up. So imagine that you are a car guy, Max comes in, you're welding something and you have a great welding machine, great welding helmet, everything is in order. You have great welding suits, so nothing is flying around. You have great air ventilation system. Everything is working as it should. You have clean metal. Everything is well prepared. The process will be sweet. You will enjoy every second of it.
Mm-hmm.
And vice versa. You have a poor machine. You have poor lighting. The sparks are flying all around into your sleeves and they're burning you all the time. And you have nothing to breathe and, it's dark and the metal is rusty and you have nothing to prep it perfectly. It will be a disaster. You will hate it, obviously. And the same thing in everything, in every aspect of human life. So when we're talking perfectionism, I guess it comes from all those years of working with bad source material, with things that, and actually one of the bad source materials were ourselves before we learned all those things.
Mm-hmm.
So now it's so easy for us. Now it's so easy for CLA. Now it's so easy for everyone. And I'm not putting the equality sign between me and CLA. Obviously, he's up there among the gods. I mean that everyone, we all are just human beings, and we had to learn. We had to put thousands of hours into what we're doing before it became easy for us.
Yeah.
Before your reflexes tell you, okay, this track just needs this processing. So you spend a few seconds on what you used to spend a few hours to try all the plugins,
Yeah, I agree completely. So maybe to kind of summarize and bring this chat to an end, there's nothing wrong with perfection if it's healthy, and you need a certain level of perfection to improve and get good at what you do, which is, as I say, I think it's probably one of the reasons you're so good at what you do these days is you had a certain degree of maybe unhealthy perfectionism to a point and then rein that back a bit. But there has to be a balance between perfection and fun, and it just needs to make sense. If you're aiming for 100% perfection to the point that there's no fun involved with anything, there's no inspiration, it's literally just aiming for that 100.00%. If that's all you're doing with nothing else and no consideration for the art, the creativity, the fun, then that's not good. On the other hand, if you're just going 100% fun and everything is crap and you're like a really sloppy punk band, that can work as well, to be honest. I mean, that has worked in the past. But ideally, you want a balance of the two things. You want to aim for quality while also having fun doing things. Because if we look in the past at all of our favorite bands, all of our favorite artists, most of them were just being themselves, doing what they did best, and just recording it. Stuff like Black Sabbath, or a modern example.
Getting better with every release, actually, is probably a better strategy than trying to be perfect.
Yeah, and exactly. Oh, that's such a good point. The thing is, if you just release stuff, and I've said this before, if you just get things finished and release stuff, you'll improve a lot quicker than if you work for your entire life on a single thing that you've never released, because you have no point of reference.
I learned it the hard way. Actually. Mm-hmm. I should have done that with my music. Everything in the universe, everything around us in nature, in us, is about balance in the first place. It's not about the extremes.
Mm-hmm.
It's about the balance. And only by the perfect balance you can achieve really good results with time.
Mm-hmm. And probably for most people, true perfection isn't 100% technical perfection. Probably perfection for most people, for me, perfection is the balance between good enough and fun. Because that's...
By the way, it's a great point. Just imagine Black Sabbath's first album being perfectly in tune, perfectly in time, and mixed by the standards of modern metal. You would probably just lose all its vibe, all its energy, and the very meaning of... So, and actually some of the audiences, some people say that they hate polished tones.
Mm.
So perfection is not... perfection is when things match perfectly.
Yes.
It's more about balance.
So imagine
you have component A, component B, and on the ways, they are exactly matching each other. They complement each other and they are in perfect balance. That's perfection to me.
Yeah.
And that's why some of the biggest records sound the way they do, because they just have that perfect taste, perfect sense of what's good for the recording.
Yep.
That's where perfection lies.
I agree 100%. That's a great way to summarize this whole conversation. I think that's a good place to end it, because I think we've passed an hour or so and we're trying to keep these shorter than our first episodes were. So I think that's a good place to end it. It's been very good talking with you, Max, as always. I had a lot of fun.
Likewise.
Very educational.
Thanks, Tom.
See you next time then. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.